Lally's game. It's too good to be true, Selena thought, grinning as she reached out and took Cade's hand, turning his SUV onto the long winding road leading to their new house. Cade glanced at Selena and smiled back at her. Then he returned his gaze to the road. A warm breeze slipped through the open passenger window and blew a few strands of Selena's long auburn hair across her eyes. She laughed and brushed them away. She turned to look at her fiancé's handsome profile. Cade didn't notice her gaze. His eyes were on the road ahead. How did I get this lucky? Selena asked herself. All Selena's friends agreed that Cade was an amazing catch. He had it all. To start, Cade was the epitome of the cliché, tall, dark, and handsome. With wavy black hair and deep-set green eyes under thick black brows, Cade had the kind of face a romance novelist would describe as chiseled. Selena thought Cade looked like a rugged movie star. He had the prominent nose, full mouth of straight white teeth, and square chin of an action hero. He even had an enchanting dimple in that chin, and his mouth worked in an endearing lopsided way when he grinned. He had the kind of whiskers that grew at the speed of light. Even though Cade shaved every morning, his 5 o'clock shadow showed up by 10 a.m. It added to the "I could beat you up if I wanted to" appearance. Fortunately, however, Cade didn't go around beating people up. He didn't have the brain or personality of an action hero. He wasn't a man's man. Selena didn't like men like that. The men who wanted you to feel their muscles and regale you with stories of their athletic prowess. Cade was a lot more subtle than that. Yes, he was fit and played several sports. And yes, he had very fine muscles, thank you very much. But there was more to Cade than his looks. Cade was smart and driven. He'd graduated in the top of their college class, and he had a great, high-paying computer science job lined up with a top company. He was also romantic, attentive, and funny. As if all that weren't enough, Cade was clean and tidy and could cook. Oh yeah, and he loved his mom. Cade's mom was the reason he and Selena were moving to his hometown. Yes, his new company was located there, but he'd only applied to it after he suggested to Selena that they move because his mom was getting up there in age. Cade's mom had given birth to Cade in her late 40s, so she was turning 70 this year. Cade wanted to be close to his mom to help her out if she needed it. Selena thought that was so sweet. On top of everything else, Selena mused as she squeezed Cade's hand. Cade now had Selena, and she was an amazing catch too. Selena grinned at her self-praise, but hey, it was true. Selena was smart and nice, and she knew men found her to be beautiful. In fact, it was her looks that had paid for her college degree. She was tall and naturally slender, and she'd modeled since she was 16. She'd done really well in the modeling world. Her earnings had more than covered college tuition and room and board. Her combination of pale, lightly freckled skin, large hazel eyes, high cheekbones, and sensuous lips, according to her agent, was, for reasons she never fully understood, highly sought after. Yeah, Selena and Cade were the perfect couple, and they were going to be married in a few weeks. It was like a fairy tale, without any trolls or ogres, at least so far. Sometimes in the middle of the night, Selena would wake up suddenly. Her chest would feel tight, her skin chilly and clammy. She figured it was a mini anxiety attack, and they made her feel stupid. She'd freak out not because something was wrong, but because everything was right. All Selena's friends had some kind of drama in their lives. Selena's life was sailing along perfectly. What was it they said about the other shoe? In those freak-out moments in the middle of the night, Selena knew she was waiting for that shoe to drop. But it wasn't dropping today. Selena pulled her gaze from Cade and looked out the open window next to her. She was delighted by what she saw. Selena and Cade had attended college in a large metropolitan area. That was where Selena had been born and raised, too. Selena didn't hate the city she'd lived in her whole life, but she didn't love it either. She'd always gravitated towards the countryside, to nature and small towns. Cade's hometown wasn't exactly a small town, but it was smallish. It actually had been a small town until the tech company that Cade would be working for had set up its headquarters in the area. The huge complex had created hundreds of new jobs and drawn thousands of new people to the region, Cade had told Selena. New subdivisions were built, malls showed up outside the town's original core. Cade and Selena, however, wouldn't be living in the new areas. They bought a quaint old farmhouse that sat on its own 5 acres of meadows and apple orchards on the outskirts of the town. The pale gray 2-story house plus attic with a massive detached garage and large front porch was a fixer-upper. But Cade and Selena thought the work would be fun. When they were done, they'd have a house perfectly suited to them. Selena was excited to move into the house and start the renovations, but she had to wait 2 weeks for that. Cade was old-fashioned. They wouldn't live together until after they were married. Cade lifted a hand from the steering wheel and pointed through the windshield. "The movers beat us here." Barely. A trace of humor hummed through his smooth, deep voice. Cade had a great speaking voice. He could have been a disc jockey. Selena looked ahead. A bright blue moving van was turning into the driveway that curved past the apple trees that surrounded the farmhouse she and Cade had bought together. "I thought they had another stop to make." "They must have taken the bypass," Selena said. "And they didn't have to visit 3 country stores because they were so cute and might have vintage clothes," Cade teased. Selena laughed. Cade smiled at the sound. He said her laugh sounded like a cartoon princess's. Although Selena's speaking voice was low and smooth, her laugh was high-pitched and musical. "I always expect little animated birds and forest creatures to come running when you laugh," Cade had told her on their second date. That might have been when she'd fallen in love with him. Selena playfully slapped Cade's arm. "I found 2 vintage hats and a stunning homespun scarf in those stores, and I had to have that vintage dress. I'll write about the stores on my blog. It will be a business expense." "That's my girl," Cade said. "Always thinking like an entrepreneur." Selena smiled. That was another one of Cade's great qualities. He appreciated Selena's success. In college, Selena had majored in business, and the previous year, as part of a class project, she started an online business, a blog and website devoted to helping women be their true selves. She created info products, ebooks, and audio packages that improved women's self-esteem and helped them look and feel their best. Her packages and her blog became so popular so quickly that Selena had earned enough from the whole enterprise to match Cade's contribution to the down payment for their new house. His share was an inheritance from his recently deceased great aunt. Selena planned to continue running the business after they married. She was thrilled she'd be able to work at home. She wanted to be the consummate country bride, a happy homemaker, who also happened to be building an online empire. Cade turned into their driveway. He leaned forward eagerly, his eyes bright. Selena loved seeing him so happy. Cade was never actually unhappy, but he leaned toward the quiet and serious side. He'd been very intense about his studies. She assumed he'd be the same about his work. He was really excited about his new job. He'd been talking about it most of the way here. Cade pulled the SUV up beside the moving van. He turned off the engine and swiveled to look at Selena. "Ready for this?" he asked her. "What, moving into our new house or getting married?" "Both. I can't wait." Selena grabbed his hand and kissed his fingers. Cade had the best hands, large and square with the faintest traces of black hair on the backs. She entwined her long, thin fingers with his thick, large-knuckled ones. She held up their hands. "Let's do this." Letting go of Cade, Selena grinned and threw open the passenger door. She got out of the SUV and inhaled the sweet smell of the apple tree's tiny white blossoms. "Wow." Selena threw out her arms and spun in a circle. "I'm going to get to see these blossoms every spring." Cade got out of the SUV and chuckled at Selena's enthusiasm. He waved at the 2 muscular guys who were opening up the back of the van. The movers, Ed and Bailey, had picked up Cade's things first. Then they'd come to the apartment Selena had shared with her roommate, Val, and they added her belongings to the van. "I thought we'd spend the afternoon here overseeing the move, and then I'll take you to my mom's house," Cade said. "Sounds good." Selena would be staying with Cade's mom until the wedding. Cade came around the front of the SUV. He gave Selena a quick kiss. "You want to unlock the house? I'll go talk to the movers." Cade headed toward the 2 big men. Selena grinned and started toward the porch that ran along the front of the house. She loved that porch. She couldn't wait to buy a porch swing. Selena stood in front of the stone fireplace in the large living room just beyond the farmhouse's small slate-floored entryway. She held a clipboard and she checked off the bureau that Ed, the larger of the 2 muscle-bound movers, was carrying in. "That goes in the second bedroom, to the right at the top of the stairs," she told him. "Got it," he said. He headed towards the stairs. A couple seconds later, Bailey stepped into the house with a big brown steamer trunk propped on his shoulder. Selena scowled at the dirty and scarred old trunk with the aged leather straps and the tarnished and dented brass clasps, lock and edging. She wrinkled her nose at the trunk's musty odor, which she could smell even from several feet away. "What's that doing here?" she asked. "Don't ask me. I just work here." He shifted the trunk. Selena sighed and pointed at the floor. Bailey set down the trunk a few feet from Selena and trudged back out of the house. Selena walked up to the trunk and glared at it. Frowning, she tucked her clipboard under her arm and bent over to lift the trunk. Bailey had carried it as if it wasn't that heavy. Cade popped through the door moments after Bailey was out of sight. "They're almost finished with..." Cade stopped when he saw Selena in front of the trunk. His face flushed and his jaw tightened. "What are you doing?" he snapped. Selena cringed at the edge in his voice. His tone was sharp, and it was wrapped in what almost sounded like a snarl. Cade had never lashed out at her like that before. He'd never looked this upset before either. She She wasn't sure how to respond. Selena decided she'd start with her best dirty look. She'd perfected the expression since childhood. She used it regularly on her big brother. She only had to pull out the look a couple times before on Cade though. Once when he'd failed to praise the chocolate chip cookies that she baked for him on the anniversary of their first date. And again when he made a snarky comment about how many shoes she had. Since then, he hadn't given her cause to glower at him. Till now. What do you mean, what am I doing? Selena flung back at him. What are you doing? I thought we'd agree to bring only our best stuff. We can afford to buy new things. We don't need old secondhand junk lying around. Cade hurried over. He took Selena's elbow and started steering her away from the trunk. Although she didn't want to walk away from the trunk because she wanted to open it and see what was so important that Cade could get all uptight about it, she let him lead her to the other side of the room. Cade's face smoothed back into its normal placid lines. He took a breath. Sorry, I didn't mean to be short with you. He gave her his trademark lopsided grin. What we agreed to bring was our best stuff and our memorabilia. I'm pretty sure a lot of your boxes are filled with photos and keepsakes from your childhood. Selena shrugged. Yeah, but this, she gestured at the trunk. When I asked you about it that first night I went to your place, you said it was just an old trunk. You didn't say it was full of memorabilia. So I figured since it was so ratty, you'd leave it behind. What's even in it? Cade put his arm around Selena's shoulders. He shrugged. Oh, just some old stuff from my childhood. Keepsakes, like we agreed to. Selena made a face. Can't you store your keepsakes in something more, I don't know, modern? I thought you liked antiques, miss. I have to have that vintage dress. Selena smiled. You had a point. Okay, so not modern. How about just prettier, less creepy? That thing looks like it belongs in a haunted house or something. Cade's arm tightened around Selena for an instant. It relaxed as fast as it squeezed, so she might have imagined the brief sensation of tension in Cade's muscles. I promise I won't insist we use the trunk as a coffee table, Cade said. He looked down at Selena and gave her another of his irresistible grins. Selena had gotten to know Cade's mom pretty well over the couple of years she and Cade had dated. The lady was very sweet, with graying black hair that she wore in a bob. She was so much shorter than Cade's 6'2". She wasn't nearly as fit as her son either. Cade's mom, call me Janice dear, reminded Selena of her own grandmother. Round-shouldered and soft-bellied, Janice looked as sweet as she acted. She had a heart-shaped face with deep-set green eyes like Cade's, and her wrinkles, smile lines around her eyes and mouth, somehow added to rather than subtracted from her pleasant face. Partial to pastel polyester pants and floral blouses, Janice looked like the quintessential country mama, and it was clear she was comfortable with who she was. Selena liked that about Janice, and Selena was looking forward to spending more time with her soon-to-be mother-in-law. She knew Janice was a great cook, and an even better baker. They spent several holidays at Janice's house, and Selena was excited about learning all Janice's culinary tricks. Selena decided she asked Janice to start with the roast chicken Janice served the first night Selena was going to stay with her. How did Janice make the chicken so perfectly moist on the inside and crispy on the outside? Selena just had to know. Oh, it's all sleight of hand, dear, Janice said deadpan. Unlike her son's deep voice, Janice's voice was girlish. She sounded more like a preteen than a senior citizen. Selena blinked at her. Janice and Cade laughed. She always says that when someone compliments her, Cade said, reaching out to pat his mom's liver-spotted hand. Janice winked at Selena. I'm just kidding, dear. I'll teach you. It's about getting the cooking temperature right, and a couple other secrets I'll pass along. Selena smiled and leaned back, totally stuffed. It was a good thing she didn't plan to model anymore. Eating like this wasn't going to do her figure any good. She wasn't too worried about it, though. She planned to take long walks along all the great country roads near their new house. Selena looked around Janice's cozy dining room. Janice lived in a sprawling white ranch-style house. According to Cade, the home used to be linked to an actual ranch that belonged to his great-grandparents, who had owned several hundred head of cattle. By the time Cade was born, though, the family had given up cattle ranching. His grandparents had sold off the bulk of the land, keeping just a few acres for privacy around the home. Cade's dad had been an attorney. He died of a heart attack when Cade was young. Because Janice loved ceramic figurines, doilies, and overstuffed furniture, the interior of Janice's home was a lot fussier than Selena preferred, but it was homey too. You felt like you could relax and be yourself in this house. Janice stood and started gathering up dirty dishes from her old trestle table. Selena started to help, but Janice waved her away. Cheesecake for dessert, anyone? Cade's arm shot up. Janice laughed. I'll have a piece, and then I'm going to head back to the house, Cade said. I'll be up early tomorrow. I want to get in a jog before work. Janice patted Cade's arm. That's my boy. Fit as a fiddle. She grinned. And starting your new job. She turned to look at Selena. And a wedding coming up. It's all so exciting. It sure was. Selena wanted to laugh out loud in glee. She smiled widely at Janice. Thank you so much for letting me stay here and for helping with the wedding. Oh, pish posh, dear, Janice said. It's my pleasure. Selena had expected the 2 weeks she spent with Janice to be a whirlwind of wedding preparations, but it turned out that Janice had everything well in hand. Selena only had a few details to handle. She had more time to work than she thought she would. Because Janice was a social butterfly with a seemingly endless number of clubs and committees, she was rarely home during the day. She was so busy, in fact. Selena wondered why Janice needed Kate's help at all. But it didn't matter. Selena was happy to be here. She was, however, looking forward to moving into their new house. While she was with Janice, Selena was staying in Kate's old room, which Janice hadn't changed since Kate had moved out. Selena thought it was sweet that Kate's space-themed bedspread was still on the twin bed and his constellation-patterned curtains still hung over the windows. She was touched by the bookcases stuffed with sci-fi novels and old-school science, math, and computer programming textbooks. She was also amused by the collection of plush toys and action figures that coexisted on the tops of the chest of drawers and the desk tucked into the corner of the room. She was curious as well. She noticed a few photo albums and scrapbooks stacked on the floor of the small closet where she hung her clothes. Kate had never shown her photos from his childhood. She hoped the albums would show her what she'd been missing. 4 days before the wedding, Selena realized she was too fidgety about her upcoming nuptials to get any work done. Janice was out. Kate was at work. Selena closed up her laptop, which she squeezed between several toy astronauts and a plush frog, and she stepped over to the closet door. Pulling the door open, she sat cross-legged on the floor in front of the stack of albums. Selena reached for the first album. Brushing dust off its cover, Selena opened the leather-bound book and smiled at the photo of the gap-toothed little boy that looked up at her from the first page. Kate had been as cute as a kid as he was handsome as a man. Selena started flipping through the photos. The first 2 pages of photos were pretty normal shots of Kate with his mom and dad in front of a birthday cake. The third page, however, was a little weird. At first, Selena didn't know what she was looking at. The photo showed little Kate in near darkness. Around him, bright-colored luminescence nearly jumped out of the picture's inky backdrop. Selena realized Kate must have been in a blacklight arena. Flipping the page, Selena saw a photo of Freddy Fazbear, the namesake of Freddy Fazbear's Pizzeria. Selena had heard of the pizza place, but Kate had never mentioned it. Strange. A few more photos revealed that the blacklight arena was in Freddy's Pizzaplex. In one photo, Kate was pointing up at the Pizzaplex's glowing red sign. Selena had heard of Freddy's Pizzaplex too. It was one of the first family fun centers built in the state. Combination of arcade and indoor carnival with games and rides and food. The album had a photo of Kate in front of nearly every game and ride in the complex, but the bulk of the photos were taken in the blacklight arena. According to a huge sign at the back of the arena, the place was called Lally's Game. That was something Selena had never heard of. The place looked pretty eerie. For some reason, even just studying a photo of it made Selena shiver. A thud from behind Selena startled her. She dropped the album, whipped around. Sorry, dear. I didn't mean to scare you. It's the aging legs of mine. Sometimes I get dizzy and walk right into walls, she laughed. Janice, wearing a powder blue polyester pantsuit, came into the room. What have you got there, dear? Selena picked up the fumbled album. She rose to her feet. Oh, one of Kate's old photo albums, Janice said. How fun. She crossed to the twin bed and sat. She patted the mattress. Show me what you found. Selena joined Janice on the bed, sitting and opening the album. Selena inhaled the flowery scent of Janice's perfume as she flipped forward to the last few pages she'd been looking at. The next picture in the album was yet another shot of Cade, pointing happily at the Lally's Game sign. Janice tapped the sign and smiled. Oh my. I have such fond memories of that place. Freddy's Pizzaplex? Well, yes. But especially Lally's. Janice ran her index finger over the picture. It was Cade's favorite game. We couldn't get him out of the place. I think if he could have lived there, he would have, she chuckled. Selena raised an eyebrow. The dark arena with its glowing neon green and purple and yellow geometric designs and prehistoric-looking caves and caverns didn't look all that appealing to her. There was something off about it. Something that made her feel edgy for reasons she couldn't discern. Janice scooted closer to Selena and turned the page. She looked at the next picture and laughed. Selena didn't laugh. Her unsettled feeling deepened as she looked at the photo of Cade with what, at first glance, appeared to be an unfriendly version of the famous friendly ghost, but at second glance, was clearly a robot. That was Lally, Janice said. poking at the robot's round white face just above its soulless black eyes. Selena rubbed the back of her neck. It felt like ants were crawling out of her hair. Lally was there to be a playmate for the kids who didn't have a friend to play with, Janice said. Cade's best friends didn't like the game as much as he did, so he was usually in the arena by himself. Janice was sitting right next to Selena, but for some reason, her voice sounded like it was coming from far away. Selena was so mesmerized by Lally that she felt like she'd been pulled out of Cade's old bedroom and sucked into the photo with the small, disturbing robot. It was difficult to tell from the photo because Selena didn't know how tall Cade had been at the time. But Lally looked to be somewhere between 3 and 4 feet tall, mostly white and smooth, with a plastic rubber outer shell. The bald robot had articulated arms and legs, and at each bend of its limbs, the joints were black. The same blackness joined its neck and torso. The robot's outer shell had been given some vaguely human-like definition. It had small ears and a small nose, the faintest raised trace of eyebrows over the eyeless black eyes, and some subtle muscular definition in the torso and limbs. Its mouth was a barely upturned curve, thick-lipped. Selena flinched when Janice turned to the next page in the album. Selena had forgotten Janice was even there. Janice didn't notice Selena's slight movement. She pointed at the next picture, in which Lally and Cade stood together. The robot was positioned so it appeared to be looking up at Cade with an expression Selena thought was vaguely hostile. No, not hostile. Possessive. The picture was the last one in the album. Janice rubbed her fingers over it and sighed. One day, someone stole Lally, she said. And that was the end of that. Janice looked at her watch. Oh dear, is that the time? I was going to bake a batch of wheat rolls. Would you like to learn how to make them? Cade loves them. Selena was still staring at the photo of Cade and Lally. She looked up at Janice. Was Cade sad? She asked. Janice turned. What do you mean, dear? When Lally was taken, was Cade sad? Janice took the album from Selena and closed it. No, dear. He was scared. Janice crossed to the closet and replaced the album on the stack. Then she brushed her hands together briskly. I'm going to change. I'll meet you in the kitchen, dear. Selena wanted to ask Janice what she meant. Why was Cade scared? But Janice was clearly done with the conversation. She bustled out of the room. Selena reached for her sweater. She was suddenly cold. By the time Cade showed up a couple hours later, at the end of his workday, Selena's chills had passed. She was sweating when Cade strode into the kitchen and said, "Those rolls smell great." Learning to perfectly knead the dough had distracted Selena from her earlier fright. Seeing Cade, though, brought it back. Selena kept her thoughts to herself during a dinner of bean soup, fresh greens, and homemade rolls. By the end of the meal, however, she was ready to confront Cade about it. She was so distracted by the memory of the pictures in Cade's old album that she couldn't look at his face without seeing the robot's face too. As if sensing that Selena wanted to talk to Cade privately, Janice shooed Cade and Selena out onto the deck. I'll take care of the dishes. You two lovebirds need your private time. Selena didn't argue with Janice. Instead, she took Cade's hand and let him out the back door. Cade laughed when she tugged him over to the big green cushioned glider at the edge of the large cedar planked expanse that hugged most of the back of Janice's home. Are we gonna make out? Cade asked, squeezing Selena close as they sat. Selena didn't resist his snuggle, but after a few seconds she pulled away. She turned so she could sit sideways on the glider and look at Cade directly. Uh-oh, Cade said. You're wearing your "let's talk about our feelings" expression. In spite of the tension that she'd felt since she looked at Cade's album, Selena smiled. You know me so well, he said. And I plan to spend the rest of our lives getting to know you better, he said. See, such a romantic. Selena was a very lucky woman. An image of little Cade and Lally flashed through Selena's mind. She took a deep breath and let it out. Why didn't you ever tell me about Freddy's Pizzaplex? Selena asked. Cade was gazing at her affectionately when Selena started to speak. But by the end of her question, he looked away from her. The easy smile on his face disappeared for an instant. When the smile returned, it wasn't as easy. Whatever I thought you were going to say, Cade chuckled. It wasn't that. His chuckle was just a bit strained. Well, why didn't you ever mention Freddy's? I looked at one of your photo albums this afternoon, and it was full of shots taken there. Your mom said you loved the place, especially this freaky attraction called Lally's Game. A muscle twitched at the corner of Cade's eye. He compressed his lips. You've never said anything at all about Lally, Selena pushed. And clearly you liked the thing because it was in a bunch of the photos. Cade shrugged. He narrowed his eyes. Have you told me about everything you liked when you were a kid? Selena blinked at the defensive throw-it-back question. She crossed her arms. I might have forgotten a few little things, but yeah, I mostly have told you about my favorite things. And you've talked about your childhood a lot. But you never mentioned Freddy's or Lally's. Your mom said Lally's was your favorite game, and they had a hard time getting you out of the place. That's a pretty big deal for a kid. It's strange you haven't mentioned it. Cade looked over Selena's shoulder. The sun had just tucked itself behind the rolling hills west of the ranch house. The sky was pink. A chilly breeze began to stir the leaves of the rhododendrons that flanked the deck. A few of the bush's bright purple blossoms blew free of their branches and danced through the air. Cade, Selena prompted. What's going on? You're acting bizarre. Cade stood. I just have some bad memories from that time, okay? Someone got hurt. I don't like to talk about it. Without waiting for Selena's response, Cade turned and headed back inside the house. As he went through the door, he called to Janice, warmly, without a trace of the coldness that had hardened the words he'd just thrown at Selena. Want some help with those, Mom? Selena's wedding day was everything she hoped it would be. Almost. Although Selena's mom had wanted to throw a wedding so far over the top that it wouldn't have been able to be held on planet Earth, Selena, Cade, and Selena's dad, who was funding everything and was happy to agree that less was more, convinced Selena's mom that a casual wedding was more tasteful. Selena's brother, David, who was as good looking as Selena was pretty, but who thought jeans and a black t-shirt was fashion, offered the winning argument. If you don't go along with what she wants, he told her mom, she and Cade could always elope. Instead of the ridiculous fluffy dress Selena's mom had chosen, a dress in which Selena looked like a merengue, Selena picked a sleek vintage silk dress with a high neck, long sleeves, and a semi-full skirt. Rather than a veil with a 20-foot train, she had only a small spray of flowers in her hair, which she had arranged into an equally sleek and simple French twist. Cade wore a navy blue suit with a white shirt and white tie. In addition to this downscaled wardrobe, they chose to use local apple blossoms and white daisies for their flowers. Selena's mom had argued for a large bridal party, but Selena and Cade had each chosen to have just their best friend stand with them. Selena and Cade had each chosen to have just their best friend stand with them. Happily smiling, red-headed Val, wearing a A-line navy blue cocktail dress, was Selena's attendant, one of Cade's college buddies. Lanky and good-natured Greg, wearing navy blue pants and a white shirt, was Cade's best man. Although Selena's mom had argued for an upscale wedding venue and a fancy catered reception, she'd yet again given in to Selena's preference, which was to be married outside. Janice had offered her backyard for the wedding and reception venue. She and her army of neighborhood lady friends also organized the unorthodox, but fun and easy, potluck reception. As Selena stood under the apple blossom-covered arbor in the lush green garden behind Janice's home, she faced her new husband after the minister, a perpetually smiling, curly-haired man, intoned, "I now pronounce you husband and wife." This was the moment, the one Selena had been envisioning for so long. Selena looked up into Cade's hooded eyes and expected to feel nothing but the rush of love and joy she'd held in her mind's eye. Unfortunately, the reality didn't live up to her expectations. Although Selena did feel her love for Cade as he smiled down at her, and she did feel happy to be his new wife, she also felt something she never thought she'd feel on her wedding day. She felt suspicious. For the first time in the 2 years that she'd been with Cade, Selena didn't fully trust him. Something about his weirdness over the trunk and his fondness for the unpleasant little robot was bothering Selena. "You may kiss your bride," the minister told Cade. Cade leaned down and took Selena in his arms.